Ohio State is finalizing a deal to make veteran NFL coach Matt Patricia the school's new defensive coordinator. The move to bring in Patricia comes with the corresponding internal promotion of secondary coach Tim Walton to the co-defensive coordinator role. Ohio State will also be promoting safeties coach Matt Guerrieri to pass game coordinator. Got to make those guys happy that are being bypassed, jumped over to bring in somebody else. Patricia, of course, is replacing Jim Knowles, who went to Penn State. In Patricia, the Buckeyes get a veteran defensive play caller, most notably for the New England Patriots, defensive coordinator for 6 seasons, won, I believe, 2 Super Bowls during that time, 2012 to 17. Yeah. He began calling defensive plays without the official title in 2010, which was a device Bill Belichick used to break in new coordinators and keep pressure off them. Defensive coordinator for 2 of New England's Super Bowl wins, and was on staff as an offensive assistant for the Patriots a decade earlier when they won the 2004 Super Bowl title. Patricia spent 3 years as the head coach of the Detroit Lions, 2018, 19, and 20, 13 and 29 record, 1 tie in 3 seasons. Certainly they have found their head coach in Dan Campbell. So if you want to make that comparison, Walton's promotion comes after Ohio State brought him in from the NFL in 2022, where he coached for 4 teams from 2009 to 21, 13 years. That included a job as the Rams defensive coordinator in 2013. So Tim Walton with NFL defensive coordinator experience, albeit for just 1 season. His new title is a nod to the strong secondary play at Ohio State under his watch, as the Buckeyes finished at number 3 in the country in passing yards allowed in 2024, number 1 in 2023. Guerrieri, who I initially thought was going to get the job, is a former co-defensive coordinator at Duke. So that was for 4 seasons, and was the co-DC at Indiana in 2023. They will all be charged with taking over an Ohio State defense that returns just 3 starters from a unit that finished number 1 nationally in total defense and scoring defense, best defense in the country. The 8 departing starters, including the entire defensive line, projected to get picked in the NFL draft this spring. Ohio State does return high-end talent, including safety Caleb Downs, who projects as one of the top players in college football next year. Junior linebacker Sonny Styles will be another top prospect, and senior cornerback Davison Igbinosun, who has the worst hand skills in terms of being physical in all of college football, but earned honorable mention all Big Ten honors. All I know about Matt Patricia was about his job at Detroit and then at New England. And during those times, I was big into the NFL. So I was well aware of his accomplishments, which are difficult to assess with the Patriots. The Patriots, during their amazing run under Bill Belichick, generally had top-notch defenses. But there was a time at different periods of that 20 years in which they rode the right arm of Tom Brady and outscored teams and had just good enough defenses. Now, if we dove into the NFL yardage rankings from season to season, I understand that we would not be overly impressed with Matt Patricia's defenses at New England. And as was outlined in the article, how much of those were Bill Belichick's defenses, because we're talking about one of the greatest defensive minds in the history of the NFL. And you also have to, because of that situation and that relationship, have to wonder how good is Matt Patricia, because he's working under one of the greatest of all time on that side of the football. So how much of that is his defense? I was talking to somebody today who was outlining Matt Patricia's defense, and his philosophy, his approach in the NFL is very much a bend but don't break, which I don't believe would transfer well to a place like Ohio State. Ohio State, every time they step on the field over the last 12 years since Urban Meyer's taking over the program, and even before that with Jim Tressel to a slightly lesser extent, they are going to be the more talented team every game, And if they're not, it's basically a flip of the coin. It's a 2022 matchup in the playoffs against Georgia. It's a matchup against Alabama in the national championship game in 2020, where they either have slightly less talent or it's a flip of the coin. So almost every game they play over the course of 5 years, they are going to have the better talent. So you do not want to play conservatively on defense. Now, you don't need to take unnecessary gambles and risks. That's not necessarily smart, but you play aggressive. You play an aggressive scheme. You come after the quarterback. There's no reason to lay back in coverage and allow teams to monopolize the clock, drive the ball down the field, and hope that because you've compressed the field, that you can get a stop in the red zone and give up field goals. So if that assessment is correct about Matt Patricia, I don't like that. Don't like that aspect. Again, that doesn't work well. I don't think it works well in the NFL because I think the skill of the players is way too high to allow a quarterback and receivers just to pick you apart and monopolize the ball. In college, in this situation at Ohio State with the best talent in the nation or one of the top 3 or 4, why would you play like that? Again, this is all I'm hearing, even though I was watching the NFL prior to, let's say, 2019, 2020. I wasn't dissecting Matt Patricia's resume, nor so much his defensive scheme. Again, he's working under one of the best of all time. You have to question how much input or how much that was really his defense. And then he goes to the Lions. And of course, he took over for Jim Caldwell, who was not successful there, who has been successful in Detroit as a head coach until Dan Campbell. Virtually no one. And so he wasn't a very good head coach, but that's not necessarily important here. So that's one concern I have is defensive scheme and approach. The other concern I would have, from what I understand, is the guy hasn't necessarily had the best relationship with all sorts of people. That seems to be pretty well founded. I've heard that from 5 different people that cover the sport, that Matt Patricia does not have a good relationship and does not typically get along with people well. So that's not good. That wasn't necessarily a big deal in 1985. It wasn't a positive, but you could get away with acting like an asshole and being a jerk to your players. You could get away with that. And I'm not saying that those indictments are true, but that's what I've heard from a number of people. So that's what I've got on Matt Patricia. Those are my thoughts right there. I would think that if I'm making the assessment, if I know that much about Matt Patricia and I have not given him 1 second of thought, his coaching resume, his coaching approach has not taken 1 second of thought out of my life, other than seeing him on the sideline during NFL broadcasts for 3 seconds at a time, that if I'm putting those 2 things out there as clear negatives, especially from the personnel standpoint, man, he better be exceptional. The hire's been made, apparently, or otherwise I would advise Ohio State, not that they listen to me, but that you don't need a home run hire. You don't need a home run hire. Look at what's going on at Penn State. Look at the hires that Penn State has made over the last 1, 2, 3, 4 defensive coordinators. They've all been really good. And I don't know that any of them are doing anything outside the box or anything revolutionary. They are just coaching sound defense. Of course, the recruiting is an enormous component in that. You need the players. Brent Pry, Manny Diaz, Tom Allen. Who did I miss in there? Well, now it's Jim Knowles. So they went from Pry to Diaz to Allen to Knowles. 4 exceptional defensive coordinators. I am not wowed by this selection. I am not wowed. But what I'm wowed by is the program at Ohio State. Got to trust them. Nick Saban used to do things from time to time, or there used to be certain NFL teams when I cared about the NFL draft that I would think, that's not a good pick. That doesn't seem like a good pick, but guess who's making that pick? Therefore, I'm going to change my mind and I'm just going to trust that general manager. I'm going to trust that front office because they have a track record. So Ohio State would have had to have vetted out everything I just said a million times over. I would think one of the easiest things to do, now it takes some nuance, it takes some layered approach to it, but if you're going to hire an offensive or defensive coordinator, what are you looking for? You're looking for productivity. So this would be the very first thing I would do. First thing I would do was I would line up all their defensive and offensive rankings and their performances, and then I would determine, okay, what was the shape of this defense in this case before this individual took over as DC? Did he improve the defense? And then what happened afterwards? Were they able to go out and find somebody who was just as good or better? So it's like the Mac Brown comparison. I do this with Mac Brown from time to time. Mac Brown never wowed me as some type of tactician or that he was a genius. But look at the results. He goes to North Carolina. They're terrible. He's terrible for the first 2 years. He implements his system, his program. He recruits. He gets the job done. And by the time he leaves, North Carolina is one of the 10 best programs in the country for 2 consecutive years. Then they fall apart again. And then he moves on to Texas, of course, from North Carolina. Texas had just suffered its worst decade in its history in the 1990s. Mac Brown takes over, elevates them to national championship contention year after year after year after year. Top 5 to 10 finishes, and of course, 2 trips to the championship game and a national championship in 2005. Then he leaves, and what happens? Now, there was some decline his final couple seasons, but they really fell off after that. North Carolina even, not to the same extent. It's not as an obvious an example, but Larry Fedora won 5 games the 2 previous years combined. Mac Brown elevated North Carolina again. I would go through that process of evaluating an offensive or defensive coordinator who has prior experience. That'd be the first thing I would do. But you would also have to do a much deeper dive than that to determine, okay, are there mitigating circumstances here? Was there a situation where they lost all sorts of veteran leadership and talent from the previous team before this individual stepped in as DC? Or did they load up and give him a great situation? Whatever the case might be. It is hard for me to determine that Matt Patricia's the best hire. If you're at Ohio State, you should have one of the 5 best defensive coordinators in the country. This remains to be seen. I am leaning heavily. I'm not making a damning proclamation that this is a horrible hire, but I'm leaning toward it not being the best of hires. That's where I stand on this.